people are acting crazy about ICE these days. ICE are doing their jobs. They're getting criminals off the street and targeting people who are here illegally, making the country safer. So why are so many people angry and trying to stop them? People seem nuts with how they're responding to the law being enforced. I don't know what the hell's wrong with people. Sane conversations are getting harder to come by today. There's a lot of people yelling and barking, and it annoys me. So I'm going to try and explain, and I'm going to provide sources for everything I say here so you can go verify it for yourself if you like. I'm not trying to convince you of anything. Your beliefs are yours, and I respect that. My only goal is to help you understand why your neighbors are angry and afraid. This will cover a couple different points, but before we get to that, I have some news that might disturb some people. Sometimes politicians lie. Doesn't matter what colors they wear or what flavors, politicians lie. The politicians in this administration and ICE say that they're targeting criminals. And it's true, they do pick a few criminals up, and the ICE website will tell you all about the criminals they apprehend. But this past week here in my home state of Maine, they took a police officer recruit. The local sheriff's office, who he worked for, has confirmed that he was here completely legally with zero criminal record, which is what he was saying to ICE as they dragged him into a car. The sheriff's office he worked for had this to say about it.
We covered our bases before we hired him, and he's definitely not a criminal. So what part of him is illegal? I don't know. Every indication we've found is that this was a squeaky clean individual that really hadn't done anything at all.
In fact, ICE took a lot of people this week who were here totally legally with no criminal record. They took an accounting student named Jean-Pierre Obiang, who, again, completely legal, had no criminal record. They took a mother of 4 who was here legally. I could keep listing names and cases, but maybe this was just an off week for them. Stories mean a lot less than data, so let's look at ICE's own data about who they're taking. This chart shows who ICE is arresting over time. And as you can see, that brown line on the bottom is people with criminal history. And since May, the percentage of non-criminal arrests has skyrocketed. That's from ICE's own numbers. You might also notice that the number of non-criminal arrests is now more than double the rate of criminal arrests. So we can see that apart from what politicians say, in the real world, they're not targeting criminals, they're rounding people up. You might also notice that this graph says that the non-criminals they're arresting have civil immigration charges, and it's worth understanding what that means. Being in this country without documentation is not a crime. It is a civil misdemeanor, not a criminal offense. So it's the same level of violation as like having truck windows that are tinted too dark. It's also important to understand that many of the people who are now here illegally came legally and were here completely legally until just a few months ago. There were sets of programs, from asylum programs to TPS, that welcomed people to this country totally legally over many decades and under many administrations of all flavors. Then this administration canceled and dissolved all those programs. So now people who did everything right, came here legally, were here totally within the law, have been suddenly declared illegal and are being rounded up and arrested. It's as though the government one day decided to revoke your driver's license because some people thought too many driver's licenses had been issued the year you got yours, and there was no way for you to get it back, and then you were declared a criminal for not having a driver's license. It's also important to note what happens when ICE takes someone. I'm going to start with what I think is the most important and work my way back, but this will actually be disturbing. Between 2010 and 2016 alone, there were almost 15,000 reports of sexual violence being perpetrated by ICE agents against detained people. Fewer than 1% of those reports were ever investigated, but even if we narrowed our scope to the last year and the reports that they did bother to investigate and were confirmed to be credible, there have been over 500 this year alone. ICE systematically assaults women, and always has. The reporting on this is overwhelming and conclusive. In case you think it's just those illegal immigrants being assaulted, it's not. There are many accounts of U.S. citizens surviving the exact same thing in ICE custody. This will also be disturbing. One Minnesota woman was zip-tied, and as ICE dragged her away, they asked, "What could you be hiding under that hijab?" What that group of anonymous, masked, armed men did to her next once they had her in a cage, I can't describe here, but you already know. It's not in the news yet, but there are increasing reports of ICE agents holding women they've arrested in private hotel rooms with them. That would be aligned with the behavior that's been documented. Here's a video from a few days ago of an ICE agent leading a handcuffed woman into a porta potty. He kept her in there for almost an hour. It's unclear whether that woman is a citizen or not, whether she's here legally or not, but for most of us who have hearts, that feels pretty irrelevant in the face of those crimes. For many of us, when we see a masked man leading a handcuffed woman into a porta potty, we immediately know who the threat to our community is. It's important to question what we hear, and some of what we hear about ICE is false or exaggerated. A lot of people on the left think that ICE is flying people out over the ocean and kicking them out of planes. There's no evidence that anything like that is happening. Seems like it was just an internet rumor that took off. But when there are over 2,500 reports per year, over half a dozen reports per day of the same crime being committed, with thousands of survivors and witnesses testifying to those crimes and footage like what we just saw, that gets pretty hard to deny. Evidence is key here. I don't know if this will seem better or worse to you than what those women are facing, but it's very important to look at where the people ICE takes are being sent. We all know that this administration has a camp in El Salvador called I.C.E, and many people are being sent there. Here's an image from what the conditions inside that camp are like, and here's a satellite image of that camp. Note the messy pile of human-shaped skin-colored things and the giant red stain around it on the concrete. As we can see, this is not deportation. According to ICE's own numbers, over 75% of the people sent to this camp had zero criminal history of any kind in the US or their home countries. So 3 out of 4 people you see cuffed in their underwear on that concrete floor or in those large red stains outside have never committed a crime. Speaking of crimes, though, it is worth noting that ICE operates with zero identification. ICE agents don't wear badges with numbers or names, and they cover their faces. And now they're going door to door and kicking in people's doors with no warrant. This is flagrantly in violation of the Fourth Amendment of the U.S. Constitution, which says that the right of the people to be secure in their persons and homes against unreasonable searches and seizures shall not be violated. So when ICE literally shows up to people's houses wearing masks, kicks in their door, and drags family members away, they are explicitly violating the Fourth Amendment. They grab people off the street and shove them into unmarked vehicles. Some are never seen or heard from again. There's a couple of problems here. The first is the disregard of our constitutional rights, but another big one is this. Not everyone who is wearing a mask and grabbing women and children off the street and throwing them into unmarked vehicles is actually an ICE officer. Some are just run-of-the-mill criminals, and on the street, there's literally no way to tell the difference. If someone kicks in the door of my house in the middle of the night wearing a mask and attempts to drag my wife out of our bed, and I use force to defend my home, have I committed a crime? Well, it turns out if they were an ICE agent, then yes, I've just committed a felony and I'll spend my life behind bars. But if they were just a normal kidnapper, then I'm a hero and I'll be on the cover of the NRA magazine. Here's a question for you, and it's not hypothetical at all. If you woke up in the middle of the night to the sound of your door being smashed in and saw a group of masked, armed men moving towards your child or your spouse's room with zip ties, what would you do? Remember, ICE wears masks and has zero identification. Everything they wear you can buy off eBay. They don't knock, they don't introduce themselves, so you have no idea who's in your home taking your loved one. Let's pretend you decide to be civil and ask who they are. And they say, oh, we're ICE, don't worry about it. Go back to bed. All right, now what do? Or more likely, they refuse to answer, point a weapon at you, and tell you to back up. Now what do? I've been present when ICE took people, and I can promise you, there's no identification. They just point their weapons at everyone, scream to stay back, and drag people away. At no point do they ask for papers, documentation. If people try to explain that they're U.S. citizens, ICE does not care. They don't listen, they're not interested. And more to the point, there is no way to tell who they are. No names, no faces, just masked men putting your family members into unmarked vehicles and leaving. There's no process. Hell, they don't even clean up the scenes when they take people. Remember that cop they took this week in Maine? They left his car, doors open, on the side of the road. That's how they operate. They show up as quickly as they can, offer zero ID or process, take people, and disappear. That police recruit's boss had this to say about it.
Got out, they pulled a guy from the car, handcuffed him, put him in the car, they all took off, leaving his car with the windows down, the lights on, unsecure, and unoccupied. They left it right on the side of the street. Folks, that's Bush League policing. We're being told one story, which is totally different than what's occurring.
So part of the concern about ICE in our communities is that it makes it really hard to determine who's just a kidnapper. This past week, ICE took a 6-year-old and used him as bait to try and capture his parents. So if I see a group of masked men dragging a child into an unmarked van, do I intervene? Again, I'll either be a hero or a felon, depending on whether it's a state-sanctioned kidnapping or not. Getting ICE out of our communities would make ordinary kidnappers obvious and afraid again. In this country, the U.S. Constitution is the law of the land. So everyone, regardless of their immigration status, citizen or not, is protected by the Constitution. because it's not just the law for some people, it's specifically the law of the land. And the Constitution is crystal clear about what citizens alone can do, things like voting or holding federal office. That distinction is made because the rest of it applies to everybody. So when ICE breaks into someone's house without a warrant, that's a violation of constitutional law, regardless of who lives in that house. When ICE arrests someone without due process, they are violating the law. In all the videos you've seen of ICE arresting people, have you ever heard a single one read the detained person their Miranda rights? Did you know that many people who are taken by ICE are never given a single day in court? ICE has deportation orders rubber stamped by administrative judges with zero process. You already know this is illegal, and I can prove it. If you're a U.S. citizen, just imagine that you're arrested, you're not read your rights, and you're held in jail for a week, and then with no process of any kind, you're handed a piece of paper that says you're guilty and gives you your sentence. You're now headed to prison. Is what just happened legal? If not, then you agree that ICE's lack of process is a violation of U.S. law. Whether you think that people here without documentation should be found guilty or innocent, I hope we can all agree that anyone accused of a crime deserves the chance to defend themselves. Under the Constitution, we are all due that process. Beyond that, everybody I know believes that nobody should be above the law. I'm an independent, but in many ways, I'm an old school conservative. I'm very pro 2A. I believe strongly in individual rights and liberties. These are conservative values that are close to my heart. Part of individual rights and liberties means that nobody can harm me without recourse. No one is above the law. But this administration is saying that ICE agents have absolute immunity from any crimes they commit. Remember, ICE was generating 2,500 reports of sexual violence per year before Trump's second term. That number is guaranteed to have skyrocketed since this administration is openly saying that ICE has total unquestionable immunity from all crimes. The agency is basically a system for men to abuse women. And according to this administration, that man who took that handcuffed woman to a porta potty for an hour has absolute immunity, did nothing wrong. And more importantly, according to this government, he can do nothing wrong. So the federal government is sending masked anonymous agents door to door without warrants. None of them can be held accountable for anything they do. The old school conservative in me finds this pretty outrageous. Just imagine if the ATF decided one day that they could break into any house they wanted with no warrant. That's what ICE just did. They issued an internal memo that said we can ignore the Fourth Amendment. That was not Congress or the judicial branch. This was just the administrative branch telling itself that the law doesn't apply to them. This administration's brand of conservative ideology wants me to think that masked anonymous federal agents kicking in my door are somehow here to liberate me or make me safer, and I am not convinced. Part of my concern comes from their own records of how they act. Like, did you know that in 2013, DHS conducted an internal study where they found that agents were stepping in front of moving vehicles in order to create circumstances where they could use lethal force? They said that agents intentionally put themselves into the exit path of the vehicle, thereby exposing themselves to additional risk and creating justification for the use of deadly force. So beyond the rampant serial attacks on women who they take, ICE has a clear and internally documented history of its agents trying to create circumstances where their desire to take someone's life appears justified. It's easy to see in the video that Jonathan Ross could have stepped out of the way. Instead, he chose to draw his weapon and take a woman's life in front of her spouse. Then they left her to bleed out in the street. She had a pulse 8 minutes after he fired at her, and they denied her medical care. If you had to pick people to burst into your house in the middle of the night with no warrant, would it be people like that? Also, take a look at this map. This is the concentration of illegal immigrants by state. By far, the highest number of illegal immigrants are in Texas and California, but ICE is focusing on Minnesota. Why? Why are they focusing on a state where there are 10 times fewer of the targets they claim they're looking for? Why are they in my home state of Maine, which has like 5,000 total, compared to the Southwest, which has 3 million? I have my own suspicions, but because they're just suspicions, I'll leave them out of this video and you can form your own guesses. But on the whole, something does have to be done about illegal immigrants, right? They're a drain on the economy and drive crime rates up. They cost Americans money and make our lives worse. That's the claim this administration makes. But remember how politicians lie? Let's take a look at it. The drain on the economy is in welfare, right? It's housing vouchers, food stamps, transportation support, free medical care, all that stuff. There's a couple angles we can look at this from. The first is who's using welfare. Turns out illegal immigrants are ineligible for almost all welfare, so welfare is overwhelmingly used by native-born U.S. citizens. Immigrants use less welfare in general, and undocumented immigrants use the least. The second way that we can approach the question is this. If your town or city was considering an investment of $100 that was guaranteed to return $6,200 in 5 years, would you support that? Critics always frame welfare as though it's just money wasted, gone forever. But we can measure this. And it turns out that welfare has one of the best ROIs, returns on investment, of any expenditure a government can make. For every dollar spent on food stamps for a family, that family generates $62 more in return over the next 5 years. Turns out, letting people starve doesn't make for productive workers or a strong economy. Food stamps are the extreme example of this, but for everything we'd consider welfare, the ROI is 1 to 3. For every dollar spent on welfare, $3 are generated in the economy. Also, do you know how much undocumented immigrants pay in taxes every year? A lot of folks think it'd be zero because they're not documented, but that's not at all true. Most undocumented people pay taxes. In fact, they pay a lot more than citizens because they're not eligible for returns. So everything withheld from their paycheck stays with the government. Undocumented immigrants pay $100 billion every year in taxes. Per capita, they contribute more to the economy than citizens do. If you want to know how removing undocumented people from this country would actually affect the economy beyond the barking of politicians who have their own motivations, here it is. So we can see that despite what some politicians say, in reality, removing immigrants won't actually help our economy, it will hurt it a lot. Removing all illegal immigrants would harm the GDP of this country by almost 7%. That's trillions of dollars. So why are they doing it? I have suspicions, but rather than share them, I'll share a few more clear facts. Multiple states are currently working to pass laws that would make being in this country without documentation a lifetime sentence. That means a couple things. The first is that you, the taxpayer, would pay for housing and feeding those people forever. But while this would cost you money, it would make other people a lot of money. The prisons where these people would be kept are corporate owned, and those corporations make inmates work. Did you know that slavery is not illegal in the U.S.? When slavery was made illegal, they wrote in a loophole, and it's for inmates. If you're in prison, you can be forced to work. Companies from McDonald's to Walmart to Verizon use prison labor. So if these laws pass, then corporations will be given millions of slaves, and the labor of those enslaved people will make more profit for the billionaires who own those prison camps. Instead of undocumented immigrants paying taxes and contributing to the economy, they would just make more money for rich people while you paid for their food and housing. Remember that 3/4 of the people ICE take have no criminal history of any kind. So if they enslave 100 people, they just enslaved 75 people with no criminal history. And that's before we even ask bigger questions like, as a society, do we support slavery? Do we support it as a punishment for civil misdemeanors? For reference, other civil misdemeanors are things like jaywalking. Is jaywalking a lifetime of prison labor now? If not, then beyond the political barking, why are we considering a lifetime of prison labor as the response to the civil misdemeanor of being undocumented? As far as crime rates go, it's good to get past the political rhetoric there as well and look at the actual numbers, which speak for themselves. The entire argument that undocumented immigrants increase crime rates relies on you not being able to read this graph. Statistically, if someone's committing a crime in this country, it is absolutely a U.S.-born citizen. Politicians love to bark about the single examples of undocumented immigrants committing crimes. And it certainly happens. Every demographic has criminals, of course. But they'll never show you the actual numbers, because as soon as they do, their entire argument is revealed as being dumb as hell. So the argument that undocumented immigrants are the reason our lives are hard is not backed up by the math. The idea that they're an economic burden or that they increase the crime rates are just lies. But you know who is a financial burden? ICE. In order to solve this made-up problem of undocumented immigrants sucking our economy dry, ICE now receives $50 billion per year. They're the 8th largest military on the planet now by budget, and that's before the new budget that just passed, which gave DHS $250 billion. The return on investment for what they're doing is negative. Every dollar we spend on ICE, we lose money as an economy. Remember what happened in Florida when DeSantis started rounding up all the farm workers? They all hid or left, and we watched crops rot in the field because the farmers couldn't find anyone else to harvest vegetables. The economic cost of ICE is very hard to measure, but it's not hard to see that beyond sucking the federal budget dry, ICE is driving workers and taxes out of our economy. And while the government may declare ICE totally immune to consequences, that doesn't mean that what ICE agents are doing every day isn't criminal. It very much is, even if it goes undocumented. Some people think that, well, they're catching some criminals even if they're overdoing it a little. We've already seen that the majority of ICE arrests now are people with zero criminal history, and that's rising. It's true that they're catching some criminals, though, and doesn't that justify some harm? There's two things to bear in mind in response. The first is that we already have a very well-established system to catch criminals. It's the police and the FBI, the entire judicial branch of the government. That's their job. So if the goal is catching criminals, regardless of their immigration status, why do we need to spend $50 to $300 billion to create a redundant system to do that. Why don't we just let the police do it? The very best case scenario is that ICE is a wildly overpriced, super ineffective replica of your police force that has less accountability and serially assaults women. But as the ICE website will proudly brag, they do catch some bad people. Let me ask you this. If someone dropped a nuke on your town or city, would the damage they caused be justified by the fact that they certainly took out a few bad people? If not, then why? I know it sounds obvious, but really, hold your explanation in mind. Is it because hurting a couple criminals is not worth hurting a whole bunch of innocent people? That's how I feel about it, and if you agree, then maybe you're starting to understand why people are protesting against ICE. Imagine that the federal government was actually planning to drop that nuke on your town or city. Would you maybe have something to say? Maybe you want to stop that? Maybe be out in the streets? This is why people are in the streets right now. ICE taking my wife, assaulting her, and sending her to that red smear on the ground in El Salvador would be a nuke in my life. If I was given the choice between that and a nuke, I might pick the nuke. So ICE is a nuke in the lives of every single family that they abduct and assault people from. Every day now, more police departments across the country are reporting that ICE is not acting like law enforcement, and that's true. They're not targeting criminals, and a quick look at how they act shows a complete disregard of the law. A lot of leftists say they're acting like a military occupation, and that's obviously not true. A military occupation would focus on targets, and ICE isn't doing that at all. Also, the military rules of engagement are far more strict than what ICE gets away with every day. Any active service member would be court-martialed for acting like ICE. But there is a type of organization that does historically set up secret camps and then, using concealed vehicles, go out into the community, grab someone and run away as fast as they can while hiding their identities and gunning down anyone in their way. ICE took a man's life the other day for filming them. There's a type of organization that does things like that a lot. A type of organization that serially assaults women and uses children as bait and weapons, leaves cars open on the side of their road. I'm going to ask you to set aside your political beliefs when I say this, because it'll be uncomfortable. Just focus on the facts of what we're covering here. This is ISIS. This is ICE. They act exactly like a terrorist insurgency. When I look at that video of a masked armed man following a handcuffed woman into a porta potty for an hour, it's pretty clear to me who the threat to my community is. Is it clear to you? When you see that footage or the millions of clips like it, who is the threat? Is it this child or the anonymous masked man trying to tear her away from her family? Apart from what the talking heads and politicians say, if you saw a group of masked men in unmarked vehicles stalking a group of school children, who would you think the threat was? As I said, I'm genuinely not trying to convince you of anything. I just wanted to give you a good faith explanation of why so many of your neighbors are angry and scared. My wife is brown. Every time she leaves the house, I'm terrified that I'll never see her again, because people in my community are being taken by anonymous masked men every day now. Maybe those men are ICE, maybe they're not. If they are ICE, maybe those people will be given a chance to demonstrate that they're here legally. Maybe they won't. Either way, maybe they'll be chained and put on a plane to El Salvador and no one will ever hear from them again. That's the reality that we're living in. I understand that this administration and a lot of the media work very hard to convince us that immigrants are dangerous and the problem. But from the actual data, it becomes pretty clear that the danger and the problem is not immigrants, it's ICE. Once you start to see how ICE is not acting like any kind of law enforcement, but they're acting like a terrorist insurgency, you might begin to see how the people who are outraged in the streets today are actually acting with a lot of restraint. Mass civil disobedience is the gentle response to anonymous masked terrorist kidnappers taking your neighbors and your children. I'm no historian, but I can see this. Once an unaccountable government agency starts dragging people away in unmarked vans to unknown camps, they don't tend to stop. ICE is operating outside of and above the law. I'll say it one more time. There are masked, unidentified, unaccountable federal officers kicking in doors without warrants. They are taking and assaulting U.S. citizens. If you're a liberal, this should upset you. If you, like me, have conservative leanings, this should absolutely outrage you. This is what expansion of federal authority looks like. The government never comes out and says, hey, we're going to take your rights away. They tell you they're cleaning up your country. And if you cheer, then during that noise, all your rights just quietly drift away. How many more of your rights and your community's children will you watch ICE disappear?